and welcome to Cohort Connect's session with Dr. Shailender Swaminathan, Professor of Economics and Dean of Social Sciences in Sai University. Dr. Swaminathan has a PhD in Economics from University of Southern California and is an adjunct faculty member in Brown University's Department of Health Policy, and is an investigator at the Providence Veterans Administration. His work has been published in several journals, including the Journal of the American Medical Association, Journal of Health Economics, Health Affairs, and the Economic Development and Cultural Change. One of his previous papers received the Academy Health Article of the Year Award in 2009. His work on the role of the Affordable Care Act has been cited as evidence in a recent US Supreme Court case on the pros versus cons of expanding health insurance coverage. Dr. Swaminathan's broad research interests are in the formulation and application of credible research designs to examine questions of relevance to public policy. In recent work, he has worked on understanding the impact of health insurance expansions on utilization and health in both the United States and India. So today's topic is what can we learn from data visualization? So over to you, Dr. Swaminathan.
Yeah, thanks very much. Hi, everyone. Really great to have all of you. So what I wanted to talk about is a topic that I guess some of you might have already heard about. Data visualization is probably a term some of you have come across previously. But the basic idea is, of course, that there's some data that you sort of now can see, right? I mean, that essentially is what it is. But more than that, it is sort of, hopefully we can learn something fundamental about the way the world works, the way society works by actually visualizing the data. I mean, so the way I think one can sort of think about data visualization is if something doesn't strike you visually, as being true, it probably is not true, right? I mean, that generally is correct. I mean, for the most part, we rely on visualization to sort of, say, do we actually believe in something or not? I mean, a lot of science actually, has to rely on visualization. And so now the question is, if you want from data to find out something that's true, let's try and visualize that. But what I wanted to give you a sense about today was just a broad flavor of, basically a couple of very prominent examples in the field. One where data visualization has worked really well, and the other where data visualization has not worked very well. But before I did that, I wanted to get a quick sense from, one or more of you. Have you come across this term data visualization in school or other work? And if so, what is your understanding of that term? Anyone? I mean, so just go ahead, unmute yourself, and I'm assuming you can unmute, but I just want to understand, is data visualization something that you're sort of familiar with, or at least familiar with the word, the term? So normally silence is, there's two ways to interpret silence. One is actually, that's a pretty dumb question, or actually, we don't know. But I'll just give it another 10 seconds. Anyone wants to? Have you ever? So I guess the answer is no, right? With data visualization. But one thing I'd want to mention is, regardless of whether one is in the field of computing and data science or the arts and sciences, it's something that will basically be take the center stage in a lot of the things that you would learn about, and of course a lot of the applications right now with data visualization are in the area of computing and data science, but that will be certainly a subject that you'll perhaps dive into much more as part of the regular curriculum. Today, we want to just sort of get to sort of see if, we can get excited about that. What can data visualization actually give us? So I'm going to actually present a couple of examples. All right, and I'll start with one map. By the way, can everyone hear me? I'm assuming that I'm audible. Is that right, Nandini? Yeah. So I'm going to start with an example of data visualization, which is, has been regarded widely as perhaps the one of the greatest examples of data visualization in terms of how much we have learned. And not more than that, it's also incredibly timely. Okay, it has to do with data visualization that occurred in the 1850s. I think it was 1851 or 1852. And so I'm going to provide you with some context, okay, and then sort of see if I can, lure you into sort of providing some responses. So the context is, this is 1850, and a lot of, obviously there's been infectious diseases that have been widely prevalent. And the prevailing wisdom at the time was that infectious diseases is caused by, sort of infection spreading through the air, right? So the so-called miasma theory of infection. And that was the prevailing wisdom. I mean, in fact, there was no alternative even considered at that time. And so you had several such pandemics and epidemics surging through the world, eliminating a lot of people. And then, so there was this one, I guess, epidemic, which was, the word for it was cholera. And at that time, again, I mean, it was sort of the feeling, I mean, it was surging through the world. I mean, millions have died. And the thought was that cholera was in fact caused by air, some vector, some virus essentially spreading through the air is causing these millions of deaths, right? So then, so you can only imagine when you're faced with that kind of overwhelming sort of prevailing wisdom that disease is caused by one channel. There's this sort of physician, doctor, statistician, data scientist. Actually, there was no word coined data science at that time. But if you think about perhaps the most original data scientist was this physician by the name Jon Snow. Okay, and this is in England, and I mean, Jon Snow is sort of a little bit perplexed. I mean, he's a physician, so he's seeing these patients come in, and maybe something tells him that there's perhaps more than the infection spreading through the air. And he goes, into sort of this very laborious task of essentially in the year 1853, ascertaining the location of all such deaths, right? So since he's a doctor and he's connected with several hospitals, he basically is sort of, he's able to map every death to an address, a street address. Okay. And then he plots that on a map, and I'm going to present that map and then have you react to that, right? So is that clear? He basically has now mapped every single death due to this disease in the year 1853. He knows the exact patient address, and now he is going to actually put that onto a map. Now, one thing that I just mentioned, he knows every patient address. Do you think now that would be even possible? Can we actually get patient addresses for every patient that died from COVID? Is that possible? I'd like a quick reaction to that from any of you. Do you see any problem with actually getting patient addresses in today's world? Anyone wants to unmute?
Hello?
Yeah, go ahead.
I mean, hospitals are a lot more widespread these days. There's a lot more medical facilities. So getting the address of every single patient would be pretty tough because they all go to different hospitals and such.
Sure. And then, I mean, what about privacy? Is that going to be an issue or not?
Yeah, you're not allowed to just share patient information legally.
I mean, basically, there's a lot of protocols. I mean, now we've had this big issue even in India about, what can be shared and what cannot. But, clearly, figuring out where a patient lives and actually publicly posting that, I think would be pretty difficult in today's circumstances. But I'm going to present Jon Snow's map. I hope it's clear what I'm going to present. It's essentially the map of deaths, and he lived in England, so this is going to be a map of London and then so let's see here. I think I should be able to present this. Now, is there anything visible or not?
It's visible.
Yeah, it's visible.
It is visible. Let me just see if I can maximize this any. All right, so let me just sort of, just sort of mention here, these are various streets in central London, and what these black stacks are, these stacks of sort of black tiles, are essentially the number of deaths in particular areas in London. Okay, so this is one part of London. So the higher the stack, the larger the number of deaths, right? And let's assume that population density is fairly evenly spread across the entire section of this map. So let me now ask a question for which I'm going to actually wait for an answer. Do you think that this visualization is consistent with a sort of the so-called miasma theory of disease spreading, which is that disease actually spreads through the air? Is it clear? Is the question clear? Do I repeat myself?
Hello?
Yeah, sorry, just 1 second. So is my question clear?
Yeah.
Okay, so yeah, go ahead. So is this, what do you think that, is this consistent with disease spreading through the air?
Not really. There's much bigger stack in one area than there is in others. And if we go by the miasma theory, the death would be a lot more evenly spread.
Yeah, so any more responses to that? Thank you for that response, Ananya, right?
Yeah.
Any more responses? So Ananya seems to think that this is not consistent with a theory that essentially the virus is spreading through the air. Any more responses?
Sir,
Yeah, go ahead.
can you hear me? Okay. I feel like it doesn't follow, like it doesn't correspond with the miasma theory, just because if one person is affected, let's say in the stack where there is the most, like next to the broad, if one person is affected, then the air around him or her would result in increased cholera cases in that area. So in that way, I feel it doesn't.
Okay. All right. So that's two responses. Anyone else wants to hazard a response? So both of the responses were sort of saying that this doesn't seem consistent with sort of that disease is spreading through the air, and you can only imagine. It's sort of like like the time of Socrates. I mean, we all heard stories of Socrates sort of struggling in trying to sort of talk with any degree of freedom, because basically people were of a certain view that was difficult to change. And Jon Snow, again, the question is, how does one actually sort of not only it's okay to sort of internally make sense of this, like individually, but how does one actually translate that into sort of having people take action? But okay, so let's just sort of say for the moment that there's no that it's not consistent with the miasma theory that disease of a virus is spreading through the air. So let me sort of stop there. Would this be consistent with a story that disease is spreading through water?
Can I answer again?
I'm sorry, I'll just wait for someone else.
Sure.
Good afternoon, sir.
Yeah, hi.
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 I feel that maybe this theory can work with water because different areas have different pipelines, and maybe in a particular area, it could be the disease could spread through as a means of water infection. So maybe there's a possibility that it can be consistent with water, spreading through water, but not with air. I don't feel it's consistent with air.
Yeah, and just so thank you for that, Rushita. If you sort of see how you saw the sort of the map of COVID, essentially, I think if you sort of look at blocks of the city where COVID is present, you're not going to see this kind of a map for sure. I mean, it is not going to be something where you have a spike in like one area and sort of pretty much nothing around it. COVID, as we know, does spread through air. And in fact, so if you look at any map of a city map of COVID, where you actually have, I guess, block or sort of area specific density of COVID cases, this would probably not be the case. So water is a possibility. But basically, essentially what I'd like I'm going to actually give you all a sort of an assignment, and, I think Nandini ma'am will probably email that to you. You don't need to do it now, but it's just sort of an interesting exercise, just to sort of get you sort of thinking about data visualization. As I said, I don't expect that you sort of do it now. Nandini ma'am, can you still share it with the students?
Hi, this is Neha here. I think our IT team is just sharing it with the students. Just give it a couple of minutes, please. If not already shared, just a couple of minutes.
Neha, it's already there on chat.
Yeah,
file has been shared.
Guys, just check it on your chat.
So could you please check it on your chat? I mean, so basically, chat.
Hi, mom, but some of them have been joined now only, so we couldn't get the chat messages.
I will share it again here once again.
Okay, sir.
So when you do get it, please could you just open that? And I'll tell you what you need to open. Did you get that? Did you get it?
Yes, sir.
So if everyone can please open up this one PDF file that's called Mapping a London Epidemic. So did you do that? Did you open it?
Yes.
Okay, so I'm going to actually let me just sort of share my screen again. So basically, you see, this is the same map as earlier on, but now we've just plotted this like, essentially these are dots, these are not stacked, right? And you get the same basic answer that, around Broad Street, the density of deaths is quite high. In fact, if you look at Oxford Street, there's almost very few deaths. So basically, again, I mean, as I said, this is an assignment more for just thinking about. You're asked to sort of talk about what each dot represents. In this case, it represents a death. But really, you've already mentioned that it seems like a lot of the deaths are concentrated around Broad Street. And what Jon Snow went on to do then was to just sort of overlay on that the next sort of I guess figure. I mean, do you see this, the one with water pumps? Are you able to see a graph with water pumps? A map?
Yes.
So yeah, go ahead. Hello? Hello? Hello, can you hear me?
Can hear you, sir.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, so can you see this map of water pumps?
Yes, sir.
Okay, so I'd like a quick response to this. Why don't you just go quickly back and forth between the map of water pumps that you're seeing and the death map, which is the first, the actual death. Every dot there represents a death, right? And you go back to the water pump, right? I think there was a response early on. I mean, why? I mean, if it actually is spreading through water, right? What do you think is going on with that? I mean, obviously there's multiple hand pumps, right? These water pumps, but the deaths are concentrated around Broad Street. Why might that be the case?
Can you repeat it again, sir?
Right. So basically, let me repeat this again. The deaths are concentrated around Broad Street, correct?
Yes, sir.
From that first graph. This is Broad Street. The deaths are concentrated around Broad Street. And as I said, I'm referring to this particular file, the PDF mapping a London epidemic. The deaths centered or clustered around Broad Street, but the pumps are a little bit more spread out. The water pumps, correct? Yes?
Yes, sir.
Yes.
Okay, so let me just sort of then try and get some responses. What do you think might be going on? I mean, so you all sort of seem to say that, it seemed like maybe it's consistent with water. And what was nice was that none of you sort of said, yes, it is water. You said it is consistent. The story is consistent with the water being implicated as the cause here. But why do we think that, these pumps are spread out, but deaths are not, and we're still saying it's due to water? What do you think might be going on?
Sir, there might be a possibility that the water pump around that particular street has infectious water, and it's not the case with the other pumps.
Okay, so when you say water, so we're sort of referring to groundwater, right?
Drinking water.
So, I'm sorry?
It's not the problem
water.
might not be with the groundwater, but with there might be some technical issue at the factory, or there might be a problem with the technical aspect, not with the
Okay.
groundwater.
Okay.
Hello, sir.
Yeah.
I think there might be some problem with the resident near that Broad Street water pump, sir.
Okay.
Assume that one usual day, maybe he might have spread all the infection in that area. I think it's resident's problem.
So wait a second.
That certain resident.
So Keshav, when you say he or she has spread the infection, are you suggesting that water is not the cause of the problem? I mean, I'm still trying to now understand.
No, sir. I meant that he or she, one day, they tried to get some water in the water pump.
Yeah.
Then that spot might be the hot spot of cholera disease. I assume that this is a common water pump, so other people also can come and get it.
Okay. All right. So anyway, so who was that who responded that it's something with the source of water for that particular pump? Who was that?
That was Keshav.
Keshav? Okay. So let me just now push you a little bit further on this. Okay. Because remember, this is sort of like, as I said, I mean, one of the, I guess, where essentially an entire theory was sort of built around data visualization. Would you be satisfied then, right? So suppose now from this graph, right? Are you satisfied that water is the source of cholera?
Yes, sir.
Everyone's certain about that?
Yes, sir.
No, sir.
Okay.
Can it be through food?
So I'm going to actually push you a little bit more on this. Okay. I mean, this is more, again, I mean, this is a class to just get us all thinking, including myself. Remember, this is a very specific picture in central London, right, with water pumps. Okay. Now, naturally, water pumps, it's not like all of London is actually going out to that water pump on the street for its source of water, correct? I mean, this is London of 1850s. People have pipe water at home, correct? This particular disease, which is now being called cholera, is not just there in London. It's there in the United States. It's spread a lot of Europe, right? So basically, given that, right? The question is who is pretty emphatic that water is the source of the problem? Who can sort of claim that from this graph?
Shailender, if I may interrupt, your screen is showing your email.
Oh, sorry. Okay, so I'll close the screen. In fact, I'll probably just thank you. So anyone still feels that water, I mean, are we convinced that it's water, or do we feel that there's still more work to be done?
No, it's water, sir.
Who said that?
Valinayagam.
Yeah. How do we know that, Valinayagam?
So the water may be contaminated.
Yeah.
Because the cholera can only spread through water and food, and not through any other sources. And you are saying that there is only one way, like only one pump at that area of Broad Street. So there will be only a single way. It might be a water. For example, there might be any sea waste dumped in the water. So the water can be contaminated. So there might, but the particular cause may be the water. Water may be the only way to spread cholera in that street, in that area.
Okay. All right. So I'm going to leave you with that. Okay. I'm going to just leave you with that thought. This particular study, it's called the Jon Snow Experiment. Okay. I mean, this is just the beginning. The one map that I showed you is the most famous map of data visualization, or clearly one of the most famous maps that exists. And the reason was fairly simple, right? Was that it required, it was a very simple map. Just think about the map. Basically, it's a stack showing the number of deaths in a particular area. And basically what Jon Snow goes on to do, and I'm going to just sort of tell you the story with this map. Okay, there's nothing else that he actually needed beyond this map. But what he did was quite stunning. And it just goes to, I mean, I guess the reason I'm telling you this is because you're all young enough to perhaps, emulate or do even better than this, right? It could have been very easy for them to sort of say, yeah, it's water, we're done, let's move on. But being a true scientist, right? Jon Snow then went on to visit about 300,000 households in London, right? 300,000 households. I mean, and when I say he visited this household over a 1-year period to essentially figure out, was there anyone from the household that had died, due to cholera-like symptoms over the past year. Okay. And then try and sort of ascertain from them, also what the source of water was that particular household was actually receiving. Okay, what I'm going to ask you to do now is essentially to stop this particular example there. And I want you to sort of, read up on your own the particular experiment of Jon Snow. And, hopefully in a subsequent meeting, we'll sort of carry on with this to sort of show or have you sort of explain your understanding of what Jon Snow, in fact, ended up doing to sort of, essentially show that cholera was a waterborne disease. Okay, but data visualization, why that map was a central point of focus. So I'm going to sort of switch now to perhaps an even more dramatic example. Okay, because as I said, it's a data visualization we all will have to do at some point or the other, one way or the other. And it has nothing to do with sort of the intelligence or what they call raw intelligence of a person, right? It requires a very different skill to figure out what do I actually need for me to actually learn something from a picture, right? Or from a graph. And more importantly, what the current example that I'm going to talk about will show is what might we actually miss, right, by not looking at the full picture, right, which is actually equally important. So what do we learn from what we see? What don't we learn, or what is hidden by what we don't see? And so the example that I'm going to sort of talk about next will sort of discuss this. Okay, so how many of you actually have sort of heard about any space misadventures? Sort of these rockets going up, not doing the job. Have you ever heard of any such incidents?
Yes, sir.
Who's this? Jugal?
Yep, that was me.
Yeah, can you tell us a little bit about what? So what are you thinking about?
GSLV, ISRO's satellite to moon failed. The rocket went off. It went off. No, there was a heating problem or something, and then the whole spaceship just flew apart and it crashed.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Yes, I mean, I know there's something more recent, right? The last couple of years, there was something with, of course, that was not the entire aircraft went missing. This is one of those, was it a Mars landing that they attempted? Or was it a landing on moon that didn't go well?
Yeah,
what's that?
On Mars.
On the moon again.
Chandrayaan.
Yeah, Chandrayaan, right? So what happened with that?
While they landed, they lost
communication
connection
to the rover.
behind the back of the moon. While they landed, the systems, the office, headquarters in Bangalore lost connection with the side just as it landed, and it crash landed at the moon, back of the moon.
Yeah. So see, I mean, and obviously we have the most brilliant scientists working, right? I mean, at ISRO, at NASA, I mean, they're perhaps the most brilliant people that are working. But, I guess the example that we want to talk about here is that, why even at this high level of brilliance, data visualization is a very central part of how people actually, data visualization is absolutely key. Okay. So now the example I'm going to show you is, again, a huge example of when data visualization actually did not work out the way it should have. Okay. And the reason I'm telling you all of this is that, just to make sure that, when we have data, we take every bit of it incredibly seriously, right? Because the implications when things go wrong can be pretty devastating. So I'll share the screen again. Okay, so this is the Challenger spacecraft. I mean, 1986. That basically, essentially exploded about a minute into takeoff. Okay, and it's been given as sort of a very classic example of what actually went wrong not necessarily with sort of, the technology. Obviously, the United States was at the top of their game, but really with data visualization. Okay. So basically, there was this sort of rocket, 2 boosters, sort of taking off, and, everything seemed fine. It was a pretty cold day. I think this was out of Florida. Pretty cool day, 30 degrees Fahrenheit. Okay. And it just blew apart. So, unfortunately, people lost lives. But what we want to sort of talk about here, can you see the screen?
Yes, sir.
Okay, I just want to talk about, okay, so let's just sort of read this before we get into the sort of the specifics of data visualization, right? So again, this is the context, right? So this is 1986, January 1986. Obviously parts of the United States get pretty cold at that point. The second paragraph starts: 1 day before the flight, the predicted temperature for the launch was 26 to 29 degrees. Right, concerned that the rings that would not seal at such a, so they're these sort of what they call O-rings that are supposed to seal, I guess, the leak of, these sort of gases at the time of takeoff. These rings are supposed to prevent the gas from leaking. Okay. But there was some concern that the rings would not seal at such cold temperatures, right? So the engineers who designed the rocket opposed launching, right? Anyway, so you can read this. This is also with you, okay? And just see the response. The high-level NASA official responded that he was appalled by the recommendation not to launch, right? Bottom line, essentially they're they're ignoring this sort of viewpoint that you really should not launch, okay? But, again, so obviously later on, you can only imagine in a country like the United States, right, that NASA is sort of saying, no, we're ready to launch. You've presented your data. We just don't agree with it. We don't feel that there's any justification not to launch. And what's remarkable is NASA was not hauled up. You can only imagine legally, right? These would be cases taken up. NASA would be in the dock if something, if they were ignoring something. But actually, it turns out NASA, essentially was not implicated in this. And just to sort of, give you a preview of what is to come, it came down to the fact that what was presented as data visualization from these engineers to NASA, right, was a very poor data visualization. That is, it was not, I guess, sufficient for us to actually make a decision not to launch. Okay, so now, can you close the door? I need to. Okay, so let's just look at all the figures that NASA essentially was seeing that day, and let's see if you think you would have made the similar decision that NASA did. Okay, which was essentially said, we're going to actually do this launch. All right, so basically, what were the engineers actually concerned with? They were saying that when the temperature gets cold, right, that O-ring that is there to prevent the leak of gases at, when this sort of thing, rocket launches, does not work as well, right? So here's the first figure that was presented for NASA, right, by these guys, these engineers, right? So essentially, can you see this? I mean, do I need to make it a little bit bolder? You can actually open it on your screen. But basically, it's sort of saying, okay, these all on the extreme left column, these were the previous launches that we made, right? This was the name of that particular rocket. And then this cross-sectional view. So in terms of like damage, right, was there erosion? Was the perimeter affected? Was the sort of diaphragm affected? I mean, basically, they're sort of saying, okay, in terms of like damage, what was done in each of these cases? So let's just sort of recap how they're presenting this data. They're saying previously we have launched things, rockets, that O-ring was recovered, and we looked at how much damage occurred to that O-ring at various, with various launches, right? what is remarkable about this first figure? What is so remember what was the first the engineers, what were they worried about? The fact that what was the worry of the engineers? There was something about temperature, right?
Yeah, temperature.
What was that? At cold temperatures, the O-ring would not function, right? As well as it should. So take a look at that first visualization that NASA is looking at. What do you think is missing from this visualization?
Temperature.
There is actually no mention of temperature in that first graph, right? There's a bunch of things. Imagine this is 12 hours prior to launch. There's not a single mention of temperature. Anyone else wants to risk? I mean, like, Shugal, thank you for that. But there's still no mention. Let's just see what they look at next. There's a figure that shows when the O-ring may not function. Again, it doesn't actually get into temperature, but it sort of says how erosion in the O-ring, interacts with an erosion in a separate O-ring that's attached to it. Again, there's no mention of temperature. All right, and here was sort of the punchline graph that they showed. Right, I mean, just imagine this. Okay, I'm going to just explain this visualization. Remember, what we're looking at is data visualization. There's some data, someone's sort of trying to put it in a way that people can visualize, right? So these are all the right side table gives these previous launches: SRM 15, 22, and 25. Okay. Now, by the way, SRM 25 is that particular Challenger that was launching in 1986, right? The one that we are now basically concerned with. SRM 15, right? Basically, this blow-by is essentially the deposition of soot on the O-ring, right? It's not actually erosion. What is called a blow-by is just deposition of, basically dust, soot on that particular O-ring. So what they say is, read with SRM 15. SRM 15, right? If you see the fourth column here, that temperature here, 53 degrees Celsius is when SRM 15 is launched, okay? You see the number 53?
Yes, sir.
That is the temperature when SRM 15 is launched. Guys, I mean, I just want to make sure everyone's sort of, clued into this, because there's going to be questions at the end. Everyone's with me now?
Yes, sir.
No, there's still only one response.
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Yes.
Okay, because as I said, there will be follow-up questions. So the fourth column, 53 degrees is when SRM 15 actually is launched. 75 degrees when SRM 22 is launched, and 29, roughly, I think it's 29 degrees when SRM 25 is launched. Okay. What NASA then is looking at, SRM 15, okay, this is the data, it's handwritten, right, for NASA. Worst blow-by, that is worst deposition of soot, okay. Much worse visually than SRM 22. Okay. SRM 22, which comes next, blow-by. Again, there's a blow-by, there's deposition of soot, right? Then they talk about something else, SRM 13A and all those things. There was some blow-by on the nozzle, right? They have deposition of soot on the nozzle. So imagine now you're looking at this table. I'm going to ask for a reaction from one of you, someone else apart from Jugal. If you're now stopping, if you're looking at this visual, right? What are you concluding about whether or not, is it clear what is going on here? The engineers are claiming that it will be too cold for the O-ring, and the O-ring will not function, correct? And so they said scrap the launch. And they're presenting this to NASA. You're a NASA official. What is going to be your reaction? How do you think you would have reacted to this? The engineer has quoted this data on SRM 15 and 22 in his handwritten notes, right? SRM 25 is the rocket under consideration. The question to you is, would you agree with the engineer's assessment that you got to scrap the launch because it's going to be too cold and the O-ring will not function the way it's supposed to on the day of takeoff? Wait, I'm going to just wait. I need some other reactions.
No, sir. I don't think I would have scraped off the idea of launching the rocket.
You would have not scrapped it.
No.
Anyone else? Anyone else? I'm sure there's 30 of you. I'm sure there's going to be more responses. Surely you're like, basically, I mean, this is a fairly simple table, I would think. Otherwise I'll have to call on somebody. So I'd suggest someone just sort of, if you want to just volunteer an answer. Why? I mean, so let me just make this more. Why would you not call off the launch? Let me ask.
So maybe the type of hard work they maybe put would not be. They wouldn't want it to be cancelled because of bad weather.
What's that? Oh, yeah. So okay. So that's an interesting. So is everyone clear on what? I guess Vijay, was it Vijay?
Oh yes, sir. Shashwat.
So Shashwat's argument is, obviously everyone's worked incredibly hard over maybe the last year and a half. And I guess, Shashwat, from what you're saying, you're sort of suggesting is that given the hard work that NASA's put in, I'm going to look at this table and sort of say, I guess in my mind, I'm also saying, I'm not going to scrap this launch because of all the hard work. But remember, the NASA official will be absolutely, mauled in court if, they make a judgment based on what the point you just mentioned. That is, there's a lot of hard work, right? It has to be based on data and data alone, right?
May I?
Yeah, go ahead.
So, I wouldn't have scrapped it off because there's only one previous experience. And that's just not enough history to just scratch off a project.
Yeah. And I would not
testing, or go into more testing.
Yeah.
Yes, there's no substantial evidence that it will not work at low temperature.
I'm sorry.
Data.
Sorry, can you go ahead?
So there's no substantial evidence that it will fail at lower temperature based on data.
Yeah, absolutely, right. So, I mean, in fact, I've studied this particular file for years now, and the more I think about it is if I'm actually trained in data visualization, and I'm in this room in 1986. There's the basis of what I've looked at so far. I'll be hard pressed to actually scrap this launch. Okay. So now I'm going to go on. We have about 15, 20 minutes left. Right. So we go to the next sort of data visualization. Yeah, this is pretty crazy actually when you see this. So if you look at this table on the extreme right, remember you're presenting this to really brilliant people. So if they detect, if they're able to see even a hint of a problem, right? There's enough people in that room to actually detect it, right? So now here what they're showing is actually out of this data presented on top, right? These I guess the set of, basically before SRM 25, there was 6 launches, right? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Out of the 6 launches, right, up to SRM 22, out of the 6 launches, what they're saying here is the look at this table. The only 2 shuttle launches for which temperatures were shown in the chart. So only 2 that actually were launched is this SRM 15 and 22, right? They were the actual launches. The rest were not even launches, right? These were sort of just test rockets, right, on sort of fixed horizontal platforms. So they were not even launches, right? So basically, again, I'm sort of sitting in that room and sort of thinking, okay, I'm still waiting for evidence for you to sort of say that, that you're going to sort of make me overturn this launch decision. Okay, and I really encourage you to sort of read this. It's a superb article for those of you who are in physics and who've heard of Richard Feynman. There's some, Feynman actually was called upon to sort of testify in this. And he was just I mean, there's some really, really lovely, videos of Feynman testifying about what actually might have happened. But still, essentially no data. But here was the data that the engineers actually had. Okay. Is it clear what they presented? Now I'm going to sort of show you data that they actually had with them. Okay. Just check this out. There's this damage index. So on this column of damage index, with the damage index of 0 means there's no damage, and a higher damage index means there's more damage, right? Just take a look at this set of table, okay? And now I'm going to actually, with the next graph, I'm going to call one of you to actually respond. So is this clear? This is the data that was had. What did they have? They had temperature on various previous either launches or test launches, and the damage index to the array, okay? All of this data was there. When you plot that data, okay, on the x-axis, you're plotting temperature, and on the y-axis, you're plotting the damage index, okay? Is it clear what this graph is? It's just plotting the previous. Do all of you know how to plot graphs? Have you done that before?
Yes, sir.
I'm sorry?
Sir.
So basically, it's just two axes. You got an x-axis of temperature, which is here, and then a y-axis of the damage index. You just got to plot it on graph paper. And this is what it looks like. Remember, the coolest temperature that they had faced until then was with SRM 15, which is about 52 degrees, right? But look at these, all these dots coming in at a damage index of 0. Do you see this? What at the damage index of 0? What strikes you about those data points right at the bottom, on the bottom right?
So the temperature is quite high in the range of 65.
That's right, Dakshaja. If you look at the temperature, there's nothing below 65 degrees.
Yes, sir. So if you look at this graph, I think the engineers and I think the data could be reliable, and I think if I was in their place, I would postpone it, because I think this gives a clear visual that there is a higher chance of damage taking place at a lower temperature.
Yeah, absolutely. But Dakshaja, just to your point, remember this graph that you and I are looking at was not something that NASA was looking at in January of in 1986, right? They had data until this point, okay? Because these guys, right, for some reason, the engineers felt, if there's no damage, with that, then I don't think I can learn much. Do you understand? That was their argument. If there's no damage, if damage is 0, right?
Yes, sir.
Then I'm not really learning much. So you just imagine the same graph without any of the zeros. Okay, just look at the same graph without any of the zeros. Okay, which is really the graph they could have looked at without any of the zeros on the y-axis. Then what do you think? Without any of the zeros on the y-axis, what decision would have you made?
Could you repeat the question, sir?
So if I ignored all the data points with y equal to 0, which means where the damage index was 0, if I ignored all those data points, Jugal.
Yes, sir.
Imagine this graph where there is no y equal to 0. The damage index equal to 0 is not part of this graph.
Okay.
Would you still lean towards scrapping the launch? I mean, obviously, Dakshaja just said, if I look at this
graph.
Not really, no. Sorry, go ahead.
Not really, no. Wouldn't.
You might not have scrapped it, right? So, I mean, basically, I guess, and I really urge you to read this paper and also a lot of Jon Snow's data visualization work, because this tells us that data visualization, so basically, just to sort of complete the story, right? We're saying there was data that NASA could have been looking at, right, where they would have emphatically scrapped the launch, okay? And that data, right, they were not able to see. Okay, and as I said, this has nothing to do with anyone's mathematical ability, computational brilliance. This is just about how you sort of begin to understand, what do I need to visualize the full picture, right? If indeed those engineers was thinking it is too cold for launch, right, then the evidence they should be looking at is, essentially something about temperature and, everything else, and basically, the performance of the O-ring, and give all the data to NASA, right? So anyway, so basically this entire thing, the history tells us now Challenger failed upon launch, right? NASA was grilled for several months, but as I said, got away scot-free. The engineers, though, the engineers who presented this data, they, even to the point, to the last day of their lives, they actually, have to live with that, because I guess even though it was not a deliberate sort of restriction or sort of, sort of curbing of data visualization, they somehow, essentially did not provide all the information that NASA needed. So I'm going to stop there and just wanted you to think, sort of, about the fact that, we're doing sort of obviously a lot of things, great things for society. Policymakers need to make decisions. Everyone needs to actually have some data to visualize to make decisions, right? And it's absolutely key that data is presented and visualized in the right way. I'm going to sort of just fast forward to another launch, which was perhaps in the early 2000s. I think this was Challenger, right? So I think there was a discovery. Do you remember there was a launch with Kalpana Chawla?
Columbia disaster.
Was that Columbia?
Yes, sir.
Who's that, Kevin?
Yes, sir, it's Kevin.
Kevin, tell me a little bit about that.
Yeah, when the space shuttle was re-entering the atmosphere, it kind of broke along the way and shattered into pieces.
Yeah. Yeah, and again, all I'm going to do is encourage all of you. Regardless of what your interests are, some of you are interested in history and physics and, astronomy and science. But, when you're talking about lives, right, and lives that you could have potentially saved, I don't think it matters where my disciplinary interests lie. You got to sort of say, am I getting the full picture? Am I able to visualize well? Why could I not do that? In that particular instance, again, it's a fascinating story if you read about that. The idea there with data visualization, again, it was a data that NASA was actually looking at. So remember what happened was at launch, there was a piece of foam that fell off and hit one of the wings, right? And, essentially NASA had 2 weeks. Basically they were thinking whether they would allow that space shuttle to re-enter the atmosphere, re-enter Earth or not. They had 2 weeks to actually fix the problem. They could have easily fixed that problem. There was a presentation made, right, in which it was so blurry. Basically, in fact, I don't have time now, but it was a very dense presentation of what the problem was. No one could make head or tail of that presentation, right? While actually, now in hindsight, we know if the data could be visualized a little bit differently than it was at that point, perhaps, a different outcome might have materialized. Okay. So essentially, we sort of, I come away now with sort of 2 examples, which are sort of classics in data visualization. One that should interest students in sort of, I guess, we're talking about something with health and society, right? And pandemics, which is something that I guess all of us should be concerned with. The other one here, which is again at almost the cutting edge of science and engineering and technology, right? Doesn't matter where your disciplinary interests lie, data visualization becomes fairly important. So I'm going to stop there and sort of see if anyone had any questions. But as I said, as sort of, reading material, I'd strongly encourage you to read, certainly this one. But any questions? And so just to sort of, again, fast forward into your semester and work, what we're going to be doing, regardless of where your interests lie, obviously with computing and data science, data visualization takes center stage. You'll be obviously provided with, a lot of data, allowed to play with that, to try and visualize that, to try and make sense of that. Some of you talk about machine learning. I mean, a lot of that is again about data visualization. But also with sort of someone interested in history. There's in fact, I didn't cover that here, but perhaps the third most famous data visualization map that did exist is something that's called the Minard map, MINARD, map made by Minard, that showed essentially Napoleon's failed excursion into Russia. A stunning map. Okay, I mean, take a look at that when you get a chance. Basically, he's describing. I mean, so Napoleon's this phenomenal warrior, a giant in warfare, right? He would have. I mean, basically, everyone expected him to crush Russia, right? And comes back defeated. But there's this one map drawn by Minard that sort of shows what happened. Okay, multiple issues. Obviously, it's a multiple dimensional map, but Minard puts it in 2 dimensions. And basically, obviously there's temperature and distance and everything else, but he boils everything down to 2 dimensions, called the Minard map, that shows essentially just in that one picture why Napoleon failed, right? The idea is now, of course, we don't have the data. I mean, now we will have, if imagine Napoleon going in now for similar war, if he has that data, right? I mean, that would be pretty easy to sort of see that the troops could not have survived at that temperature. But it just goes to show that data visualization, I think, is pretty important for society. We've recently just, hopefully, I don't think we've fully come out of this pandemic, but, certainly all of you have been seeing these maps of the disease spreading all over the world, right? I mean, it's pretty compelling. I mean, for us to sort of say, okay, a lockdown is warranted and lockdown is not, data visualization becomes pretty key. But we'll hear more about that, hopefully, fairly soon. I want to close here if there are no more questions. Can we end?
Thank you, sir, for the wonderful session.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, Shailender.
Thank you, sir. Take care. Bye.